Welcome to today's journey. Together we'll explore Renuka's inspiring book The Art of Being Alone, a guide to finding peace, strength, and joy within yourself. There is something very beautiful, yet often misunderstood, about being alone. Most people hear the word alone and immediately connect it with sadness, emptiness, or loneliness. But Renuka Gavrani, in her book The Art of Being Alone, invites us to pause and look deeper. She explains that solitude and loneliness are not the same. Loneliness is the feeling of being unwanted, disconnected, or unloved, but solitude is different. Solitude is a chosen space, a gift you give yourself, where you allow your heart and mind to breathe without the noise of the outside world. Instead of fearing this space, Renuka encourages us to embrace it and even celebrate it. Imagine for a moment that you are sitting quietly in a room, without your phone, without anyone else around, just you and your thoughts. For many people, this feels uncomfortable at first because silence brings up things they often try to avoid, unprocessed feelings, memories, or even insecurities. But this book teaches that when we learn to sit with ourselves, when we stop running from our own company, something powerful begins to happen. We discover who we really are beneath all the distractions, roles, and expectations. This is the essence of what Renuka is trying to share. Being alone is not about isolation. It is about self-discovery. The introduction of the book feels like an invitation to slow down and reflect on how dependent we have become on the presence of others to define us. Many of us tie our worth to relationships, social circles, work environments, or the approval of people around us. We rarely stop to ask, who am I when no one is looking? Am I comfortable with myself? Renuka argues that this comfort with our own self is one of the most valuable life skills we can cultivate, and yet it is often the most neglected. She tells us that society has created a myth that being alone means something is wrong with us. If you see someone eating at a restaurant alone, walking alone in a park, or watching a movie alone, many people feel pity for them. But why should that be? Why is it not seen as strength, confidence, and independence? Renuka wants us to challenge this perception. She gently reminds us that true strength is not about how many people surround you, but about how deeply you know yourself. And knowing yourself only happens when you allow solitude into your life. When you are alone, your inner world becomes louder. You begin to notice your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, your dreams, and also your fears. At first, this can be overwhelming. Many of us immediately reach for distractions like social media, television, or unnecessary conversations just to avoid facing ourselves. But Renuka's wisdom lies in explaining that these moments of discomfort are exactly where the growth begins. When you sit with yourself long enough, you start to understand the layers of your own personality. You see the wounds that need healing, the talents that need nurturing, and the truths you might have been ignoring. The book encourages the reader to treat solitude not as a punishment, but as a practice. Just like exercising or meditating, being alone can become a routine that strengthens you from within. Think of it like recharging your energy. When you spend time with others, you are constantly giving your attention, your emotions, your presence. But when you are alone, you finally give back to yourself. This balance is important because if you never refill your own cup, you eventually feel drained in relationships, work, and life in general. Renuka also explains that solitude is not about cutting off from the world forever. It is not about becoming antisocial or shutting people out. Instead, it is about learning to be whole within yourself so that your relationships become healthier. When you know how to be alone, you don't cling to others out of fear. You don't build connections out of desperation. You build them out of love, respect, and choice. That changes the quality of every relationship you have, whether it's with your family, friends, or a partner. The beginning of the book feels very compassionate and reassuring. It's like Renuka is speaking directly to those who are scared of loneliness, telling them that there is nothing wrong with being by yourself. In fact, it may be the most transformative experience of your life. She acknowledges that yes, it can be hard, especially if you are used to constant company or have been through heartbreak, loss, or rejection. But instead of running away from these feelings, she asks us to slowly welcome them, to allow solitude to be a teacher. To put it simply, part 1 of the book lays the foundation for a new perspective, that solitude is a friend, not an enemy. It teaches us that being alone is not something to be ashamed of, but something to practice, to enjoy, and to use as a pathway to growth. And once you begin to see alone time in this way, you start noticing its hidden beauty everywhere. Whether it's in a quiet morning walk, a cup of tea enjoyed in silence, or a night spent journaling your thoughts. When Renuka goes deeper into the idea of being alone, she begins to explain the kind of transformation that can happen once we accept solitude instead of resisting it. She reminds us that most of the time we run away from being alone because we fear what we might feel. We often confuse silence with emptiness. But in reality, silence is full of answers, full of clarity, full of strength that we don't notice when life is too noisy. One of the most powerful things she explains is that solitude allows us to meet ourselves honestly. When we are always surrounded by people, we wear masks. We adjust our words and behaviors to fit into situations. We often hide our insecurities or our true feelings because we don't want others to see our weaknesses. But when you are alone, you don't need a mask. There is no one to impress, no one to compare with, no one to explain yourself to. That's when you can finally ask, who am I really? What do I want from life? What makes me happy beyond what others expect from me? Renuka emphasizes that many people live their lives without ever truly knowing themselves because they are never alone long enough to ask these questions. They go from family to school to work to relationships to social circles, and their identity becomes shaped by what others say or think. Solitude breaks that chain. It gives you the chance to hear your own voice clearly. It allows you to notice your authentic dreams, and not just the ones society tells you to chase. Another aspect she brings up is emotional healing. Being alone is not just about knowing who you are. It is also about dealing with the emotional baggage that you may have carried for years. Pain from childhood, heartbreak from failed relationships, disappointments in friendships, or even the simple stress of life. These things pile up inside us. Most of the time, we distract ourselves to avoid facing them. But solitude creates a safe space where you can finally sit with these feelings, cry if you need to, reflect on what went wrong, forgive yourself, and begin to let go. Healing is not instant, but Renuka explains that it begins the moment you stop running away from your own pain. She also talks about how solitude strengthens emotional resilience. When you learn to enjoy your own company, you are no longer afraid of being left out or abandoned. This doesn't mean you stop needing people, but it means you are not controlled by the fear of losing them. If a relationship ends, if friends grow distant, or if life changes, you still have yourself to rely on. This inner stability makes you stronger, calmer, and more balanced in facing life's ups and downs. Renuka beautifully connects solitude with creativity as well. She says that some of the greatest ideas in history, some of the most inspiring art, music, literature, and inventions, were born out of solitude. When you are alone, your imagination has space to wander. You can think deeply, explore freely, and create without pressure. The distractions of the world often keep our minds busy with surface-level thoughts, but solitude opens the door to deeper thinking. This is why many writers, artists, and thinkers often seek quiet places to work. It is in silence that creativity breathes best. At the same time, solitude is not only for creative people. Everyone benefits from it. For example, if you are confused about a decision in your life, whether it is about career, relationships, or personal goals, spending time alone often brings clarity. When you are away from noise and opinions, you begin to hear your intuition more clearly. That inner voice, which usually gets buried under the weight of external advice, finally has a chance to guide you. Renuka also touches on the idea of self-love in solitude. Many people talk about self-love as treating yourself kindly, but true self-love is also about enjoying time with yourself. Can you take yourself on a walk without feeling awkward? Can you sit in a cafe alone and feel peace instead of pity? Can you celebrate your achievements even when no one else is clapping? These are simple yet powerful practices that teach you to value yourself. When you learn to give yourself this kind of love, you don't rely on others for validation all the time. Relationships then become healthier because you are not entering them from a place of neediness, but from a place of wholeness. Another transformation that solitude brings, according to Renuka, is freedom. When you are comfortable alone, You no longer feel trapped in unhealthy relationships or toxic environments just because you are afraid of being lonely. You gain the courage to walk away from situations that don't serve you. You also learn to set boundaries because you understand the value of your peace. This sense of freedom is very empowering. It allows you to live a life that feels authentic rather than a life built only to please others. She gives many simple but effective suggestions for practicing solitude. Things like journaling your thoughts every day, meditating in silence, spending time in nature, or simply switching off your phone and sitting quietly for a while. Even small rituals like enjoying a cup of tea alone, listening to music by yourself, or going for a solo walk can be powerful. These practices train the mind to see being alone as something pleasant, not scary. Throughout these explanations, Renuka's tone is very gentle. She doesn't push or demand the reader to change instantly. Instead, she reassures us that learning to be alone is a journey, and it's okay if it feels uncomfortable at first. Just like any new skill, it takes time. But the more you practice, the more natural and enjoyable it becomes. In this part of the book, the message becomes clear. Solitude is not emptiness, solitude is fullness. It is where you refill your heart, clear your mind, and grow your spirit. It is where you transform from being dependent on the outside world for happiness into someone who can create joy from within. As Renuka takes the ideas further, she begins to explain how solitude doesn't just change the way we see ourselves, it also reshapes our relationships with other people. Many of us enter relationships because we are afraid of being alone. We think we need someone to complete us, to make us feel secure, or to give us value. But when relationships are built from fear, they often become unhealthy. We end up clinging too tightly, tolerating disrespect, or losing ourselves just to keep the connection alive. Renuka points out that this is one of the main reasons why so many relationships fail or feel unfulfilling. She suggests that once you learn the art of being alone, you stop needing people for survival, and you start wanting people for genuine companionship. This shift is huge. When you are comfortable with your own company, you are not desperate for someone else to fill your emptiness. You already feel whole, and from that place of wholeness, you can share love rather than beg for it. Relationships that are built this way are stronger, healthier, and much more joyful because they are not based on fear but on freedom. Renuka also explains that solitude teaches us to respect boundaries, both our own and those of others. When you spend time alone, you realize how important personal space and inner peace are. You begin to understand that everyone needs moments of solitude, even in close relationships. This makes you more respectful of your partner's or friend's need for space, and it also helps you protect your own. Instead of feeling offended when someone asks for time alone, you appreciate that it's part of maintaining balance. Another very important point she makes is that solitude helps us overcome the fear of rejection. A lot of people stay stuck in situations, whether in friendships, workplaces, or romantic relationships, simply because they are terrified of being rejected or abandoned. But when you are confident in being alone, rejection no longer feels like the end of the world. You may feel hurt, yes, but you also know you are capable of moving forward because your self-worth doesn't depend entirely on someone else's acceptance. This makes you braver in relationships, because you are willing to walk away from what doesn't serve you and wait for what truly does. She also talks about how solitude makes us better listeners and more compassionate partners. When you spend time alone reflecting on yourself, you become more aware of your flaws and strengths. This awareness makes you less judgmental of others because you know everyone is carrying their own struggles. Instead of reacting quickly or holding unrealistic expectations, you approach people with more patience and understanding. This softens your relationships and creates deeper bonds. Renuka connects solitude with mindfulness as well. When you are always surrounded by noise, you tend to live on autopilot, rushing through days without really being present. Solitude slows you down. It allows you to notice the little details of life, the taste of your food, the colors of the sky, the rhythm of your breathing. This mindful awareness doesn't stay only in your alone time. It seeps into your interactions with people. You start listening more attentively, speaking more thoughtfully, and appreciating moments instead of constantly waiting for the next thing. There is also a sense of spiritual depth in her explanations. She reminds us that solitude is the doorway to inner peace and self-connection, which many spiritual traditions across the world emphasize. From monks meditating in silence to poets writing in solitude, the practice of being alone has always been seen as a path to wisdom. Renuka brings this timeless truth into modern life, showing that even in today's busy world, we can create small pockets of solitude to reconnect with something bigger than ourselves. She also emphasizes that solitude is not about escaping life, but about engaging with it more fully. When you step back and spend time with yourself, you come back into relationships, work, and society with renewed energy and clarity. You are less reactive, less dependent, and more intentional. This makes your contribution to the world richer, because you are not just moving with the crowd but acting from a place of understanding. Renuka doesn't ignore the fact that loneliness is real and painful. She acknowledges that there will be times when solitude feels heavy, especially if you are going through heartbreak, loss, or transitions. But she reminds us that these moments of loneliness are opportunities for growth. Instead of running from them, we can allow them to teach us resilience. We learn that pain doesn't destroy us, it shapes us. The more we sit with our loneliness, the more we transform it into strength, wisdom, and compassion. One of the most encouraging ideas she shares is that learning to be alone helps you build a relationship with yourself that becomes the foundation for every other relationship in life. She asks, if you don't enjoy your own company, how can you expect others to enjoy it? If you cannot be kind to yourself, how can you give kindness to others? If you don't know yourself, how can you share your authentic self with the world? These questions are gentle but powerful reminders that everything starts within. This part of the book really emphasizes balance. It is not about choosing between solitude and relationships, but about combining them in a way that makes life richer. Solitude gives you strength, clarity, and independence, while relationships give you love, connection, and companionship. When both are respected, life feels more complete. Without solitude, relationships can feel suffocating. Without relationships, solitude can sometimes feel heavy. But together, they create harmony. By the end of this section, the reader begins to see that solitude is not an enemy of relationships. It is the very thing that can make them healthier. It teaches us to love without clinging, to connect without losing ourselves, and to care without controlling. It allows us to build relationships that are rooted in freedom and respect, rather than fear and dependency. After helping us understand the deeper meaning of solitude, Renuka shifts her focus towards the practical side. It's one thing to know that solitude is powerful, but it's another to actually practice it in daily life. Many people understand the value of being alone, but when they try to sit by themselves, they immediately feel restless or uneasy. Renuka explains that this is completely natural, because the mind is not used to silence. Just like learning any skill, being alone with comfort and joy requires practice, small steps, and patience. One of the first practices she recommends is journaling. She believes that writing your thoughts on paper is one of the simplest yet most effective ways to connect with yourself. Often, our minds feel heavy because of too many unspoken worries and emotions. When we write them down, we give them space outside of ourselves, which brings relief and clarity. Journaling doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need perfect grammar or deep words. Just write what you feel, your joys, your fears, your confusions, or even just simple reflections on your day. Over time, this becomes like a conversation with yourself, a way to understand your own patterns, dreams, and struggles. Another beautiful suggestion she offers is what she calls alone dates. This means deliberately setting time aside to do something you enjoy, by yourself. It could be as simple as going to a cafe, watching a movie, walking in a park, or cooking a special meal just for you. At first, many people feel awkward doing these things alone because society often makes it seem strange. But once you push past that discomfort, you begin to notice how freeing and enjoyable it is. You don't have to compromise with anyone, you don't need to please others, and you can fully enjoy the experience on your own terms. These alone dates train you to find joy in your own company, and to see solitude as something to look forward to instead of fearing. Renuka also highlights the importance of mindfulness practices like meditation, or simply sitting in silence. She explains that meditation doesn't mean forcing the mind to be blank. It means observing your thoughts without judgment. When you sit quietly, your mind will wander to many things, tasks, worries, memories, plans. But instead of fighting them, you just notice them and bring yourself back to the present moment. Even a few minutes of such practice daily can make you more comfortable with silence and deepen your sense of peace. Spending time in nature is another ritual she strongly recommends. Nature has a unique way of calming the mind and opening the heart. Whether it's walking barefoot on grass, listening to birds, watching the sunset, or just sitting under a tree, these simple acts connect us to the present moment and remind us of the larger rhythms of life. Renuka believes that solitude in nature is one of the purest forms of healing. It reminds us that we are part of something bigger, and it often brings a quiet joy that can't be found in screens or crowded places. She also talks about creating daily routines that include small pockets of solitude. For example, waking up a little earlier to enjoy tea in silence before the day begins, taking short breaks during work without checking the phone, or winding down in the evening by reflecting on the day instead of getting lost in social media. These little rituals, though simple, slowly build a stronger relationship with your inner self. Renuka understands that in today's busy and noisy world, it can be hard to find such time. But she encourages readers to start small rather than waiting for a perfect moment. Even 5 minutes of sitting quietly, writing a page in your journal, or going for a short walk can make a difference. The key is consistency. The more you practice these moments, the more natural and fulfilling solitude becomes. She also emphasizes the role of creativity in solitude. Doing something creative, painting, cooking, writing, dancing, or even gardening, can be an excellent way to enjoy your own company. Creativity connects you with your inner child, the playful and curious part of you that often gets lost in adult life. When you create, you are not just passing time. You are discovering new sides of yourself and celebrating your individuality. One of the most touching practices she suggests is talking kindly to yourself. Many of us have an inner critic that constantly points out our flaws or mistakes. Solitude can make that voice even louder, which is why it's important to replace criticism with compassion. Renuka suggests simple affirmations like, "I am enough," "I am learning every day," or "I deserve peace." Speaking gently to yourself builds inner kindness, and with time, your inner voice becomes a source of support instead of fear. Renuka also shares the importance of setting healthy boundaries with technology. She reminds us that much of our discomfort with solitude comes from the habit of constantly reaching for phones or social media to fill silence. She doesn't say to give it up entirely, but she suggests practicing digital solitude every now and then, turning off notifications, leaving the phone aside, and just being with yourself. These breaks may feel strange at first, but they give your mind room to breathe and reduce dependence on constant external stimulation. All these practices are not just about making solitude easier. They are about changing the way we see it. When we fill our alone time with meaningful rituals, it becomes something to treasure instead of something to avoid. Over time, solitude stops being a scary emptiness and starts becoming a sacred space, a place where you recharge, reflect, and reconnect with yourself. Renuka's practical advice is sprinkled with encouragement. She reassures readers that there is no perfect way to be alone. Everyone's journey is different. For some, solitude may look like reading quietly at home. For others, it may look like long walks in nature or writing poetry. What matters is not what you do but how you feel. The goal is to create moments where you are fully present with yourself, free of judgment, and open to whatever thoughts or feelings arise. By giving these gentle steps, she makes the art of being alone less intimidating and more approachable. She transforms it from an abstract idea into something we can actually practice daily. In doing so, she shows that solitude is not just a theory. It is a way of life that can be cultivated through simple, consistent habits. As Renuka moves toward the heart of her message, she ties everything together in a way that feels both simple and profound. After showing us that solitude is not emptiness but fullness, after guiding us through the inner transformations and the practical rituals, she invites us to imagine solitude not as a phase of life but as a lifelong companion. Many people treat being alone as something temporary, something to endure until another person arrives to fill the space. But Renuka shifts this perspective entirely. She says solitude is not the space between relationships. It is a relationship itself, the most important one you will ever have. When you see solitude this way, it no longer feels like a punishment or a sign of failure. Instead, it becomes a loyal friend, one that will never abandon you. People may come and go, situations may change, relationships may begin and end, but your relationship with yourself will always remain. If you have nurtured this relationship, you will never feel truly lost, because you know how to return to yourself, to your inner peace, whenever the world feels uncertain. This realization brings an incredible sense of freedom. So many of us live in fear. Fear of losing people, fear of being left out, fear of not being accepted. But when you learn to enjoy being alone, those fears lose their grip. You stop begging for attention or forcing connections that don't feel right. You no longer tolerate toxic environments just to avoid solitude. Instead, you choose relationships out of love, not out of fear. You choose spaces that nurture you, not ones that drain you. You walk through life with more confidence, because you know that even if everything else falls apart, you still have yourself. Renuka emphasizes that solitude also deepens your sense of gratitude. When you slow down and spend time with yourself, you begin to notice the beauty of small things. A sunrise, a kind gesture, the sound of rain, the peace of a quiet evening. Life feels less like a race and more like a collection of meaningful moments. This shift in awareness not only makes your alone time richer, but it also enhances the way you experience life with others. You become more present, more appreciative, and more content. She reminds us that solitude doesn't mean cutting ties with people or living in isolation. It is about balance. Human beings are social creatures. We need connection, love, and companionship. But we also need solitude because without it, we lose touch with ourselves. Too much noise from the outside world drowns out our inner voice. Too much dependence on others makes us fragile. Solitude restores this balance. It teaches us that we can love deeply and connect meaningfully while still remaining rooted in our own being. By the end of the book, Renuka has gently dismantled the myth that being alone means being lonely. She shows us, through reflection and practice, that solitude is actually a source of joy, strength, and healing. She makes us see that loneliness comes from disconnection with ourselves, not from the absence of people. When you reconnect with yourself through solitude, you may still experience moments of aloneness, but they no longer feel frightening. Instead, they feel like opportunities to recharge, to reflect, and to grow. Renuka's message also has a timeless quality. She connects the practice of solitude to wisdom traditions across the world. From philosophers to poets, from saints to scientists, history is full of people who found their greatest insights in solitude. She makes us realize that this practice is not new. It is a forgotten treasure, something deeply human that we all have the ability to reclaim. The long-term transformation she describes is almost like an unfolding. In the beginning, solitude feels uncomfortable. Then it begins to feel peaceful. Later, it becomes enjoyable. And finally, it becomes essential. Once you truly experience the depth of solitude, you don't want to live without it. Not because you dislike people, but because you value your relationship with yourself. It becomes a foundation, a quiet strength that supports everything else in your life. She also reminds us that solitude will look different for each person. For some, it may be a regular meditation practice. For others, it may be long walks, writing, or creating art. For others still, it may simply be moments of quiet reflection before bed. There is no single formula. The art of being alone is about finding what makes you feel most connected to yourself and practicing it with love. By closing the book, Renuka doesn't just give advice, she gives reassurance. She tells the reader that if you are afraid of being alone, you are not weak, you are simply human. It is normal to crave company and connection. But she gently encourages us not to let this fear control our lives. Once we face solitude and embrace it, the fear dissolves, and what remains is strength, freedom, and peace. The final impression of the book is uplifting. It leaves you with the understanding that solitude is not a shadow you must escape, but a light you can carry with you. It is the art of being whole within yourself. It is the art of building a home inside your own heart, so that no matter where you are, you always belong.